Hi, we're here today to talk about wonderful little dolls. I think everyone has seen them. Many people have them, but I don't think everybody knows what their name is. And a lot of people know them as Frozen Charlottes, and then later on as Frozen Charlies, or as bathing children, but we're calling them BadeKinder, and you'll find out why. So Anne, where do you want to start with this?
I'm going to start at the beginning of time with them, because I think that's always the best place when you have that to latch onto.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so fortunately we have documentary evidence of when these dolls were introduced to the toy markets of the world. And that comes to us through wonderful distributors' catalogs as opposed to manufacturers' catalogs. And as you can see, these for China, even though they're in black and white, they were China glazed porcelain pillar dolls. They're also known by that name. And they're standing by a Victorian era bathtub. And the secret to these items was that they could be submerged in water. Other dolls of the period did not like to take baths. Terrible things happened. They didn't just get clean. They sometimes completely dissolved in water. These you could leave in water overnight for weeks on end and nothing happened to them. They could get really clean, but they never wrinkled. So, we show you another image here of a BadeKinder, which is the German for bathing doll, or bathing child, I should say. And I've tried to emulate here in a Marklin tub, tin tub, with this little guy stretched out in a tin bathtub. These were not connected to any plumbing features. You had a basin under here. You had to take the water away, fill it with buckets full of water. It was a real chore, and children did not take a bath every night. This was a real treat for the child to take a bath. Now, because they're called Kinder, we also are given a clue that these were children and not adults. Now, the earliest doll of this sort that I have actually has a lady's hairdo on it, and she stands with her arms in a modest pose with her hands across her chest. She's the only doll that I have ever seen, and I've seen that particular model in several sizes, with an adult hairdo. The rest of the crowd up into the 20th century always has a hairstyle related to either a toddler or a young child, not a teenager, but something preteen. Now, for those of you who do not know, these dolls generally are not sexed. This little guy does have indications that he carries male attributes. And I've seen several of these, when I say several, like 3 now, and I could not swear that that is a 19th century product. It might be an adaptation of the 20th century or even the 21st century. But these usually are just as this one is, and their arms can be raised up, down, and very occasionally come across the torso.
So Anne, I noticed that some of these have like holes in their fists. Do you know what?
In their fists?
Yeah, like
Oh,
holding.
that's for taking them out of the molds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to
All
make
right.
sure that, because these mostly are two-part molds.
And speaking, these were so popular. How many companies were producing these?
Well, by the 20th century, I have records of over 220 companies manufacturing bathing dolls, BadeKinder in Germany. And Germany seems to have been almost exclusively the manufacturing site of these dolls. Later, a few are manufactured in Japan, and then reproduction people are manufacturing these in the United States in the 20th century and in the 21st century. And we'll look at one of those in a moment. If they are not all solid, most of them have an exterior vent in their little derrieres.
And that's what helps them float?
And that'll help them float.
Now, do you think most of these, because if we start going on, and particularly even looking at the one that's behind the bathtub, that even though they were BadeKinder, that people use them for all sorts of decorations and different.
We'll get into that, Mrs. Higgins. Just a moment, Mrs. Higgins. We'll begin
Oracle.
to explain.
Yes, Oracle.
Move as fast as I can.
Sorry, I thought it was just behind there, so we got that.
Now, some of the earliest of these are dolls that have bonnets on them. And we have 3 of them here. And this one with the broken arm is the original one. And what's so interesting about this one is she relates to the doll that was part of the Arabia, which was a shipping vessel that went down in the Missouri River in 1856. So that we know that this type of doll with its cap on was in production in 1856. We don't know how much earlier it was or how much later it went. And I began to think the other night, it has a cap on. Now, was that a baby cap, or was that a bath cap? Because the 1850s was the period when rubber products came into usage, and perhaps this might have been a rubber cap that was put on the doll so that the hair on the doll would not have gotten wet, not that there was going to make any difference if it's molded china. But this is the original, and this is a reproduction. And I hope that you can see that the finish on the reproduction is much glossier than on the original one. Now, at the same time, in the 1850s, we've got the same little head, but she's beginning to go on to a Toffling type body with a centerpiece, and she's being given arms that are separate and articulated at the shoulder. And this is important in the development of these, because not all bathing dolls that were advertised as bathing dolls were these all-in-one-piece dolls. And these come around in the 1860s, where you get these wonderful circus characters. This is a lady, gentleman, and this one, interestingly enough, is a very, very early bisque one. The China ones are the predominant finish for most of them, whether they're articulated or not. And but a lot of the bathing dolls are going to have wigs at in a later period. But the one thing that we're quite sure of is that the firm of Simon and Halbig did not produce early all-bisque dolls that would be called bathing dolls. They come later in the 1880s, 1890s, and on later. And as hard as we try to assign manufacturers, it's extremely difficult because most of these heads are so small that detail becomes quite difficult. The early dolls also, you find a number of them which have wonderful attire, shorts on this little guy with his turban, and this fascinating creature, whether he was one of a series of 4 dolls which represented the then 4 big continents of the planet, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. I don't know whether he's North and South America or Africa, but he's a fascinating creature. Now, before we leave this area, let's take a quick look at this wonderful dome where a very famous doll collector, John Darcy Noble, who was mesmerized by Victorian handiwork, he created a vignette using frozen Charlottes. And this is a remarkable piece. And with John's work, it takes a real expert to decide whether that's a period piece or whether that could possibly be a John Darcy Noble creation. Extraordinary work, extraordinary man, extraordinary mind. So, going from that domed selection, there were other uses that these dolls were put to later on. As you can see, this is a walnut shell, and as you open it up, there's a little latch here. There's a baby in it as if it was a baby in a cradle. There are no legs to this doll. Whether the legs were broken off so it would fit in the cradle or not, I do not know. And speaking of putting things in, can you believe that somebody a glass blower blew a glass bottle around a little frozen Charlie, whatever you want to call them?
It's amazing that hasn't broken, though.
I know, isn't it?
So fragile.
And then sometimes things are not as politically correct as we might want them to be in our way of thinking these days, but many doll collectors are familiar with the distributing company of Shackman out of New York City. And this was a favor that they offered around 1910, and it's a peanut, and it has a little black doll inside. A pressed cardboard peanut. And these were sold as favors, party favors. Now, we're going to go back to this little guy, and we're going to see that this has a variation of what collectors call a flat top hairdo, for type of hairdo that was popular for little girls in the mid-years of the 19th century. But not all black dolls, as you'll find out, that are this type of doll have that sort of hairdo. They also were given the wonderful curly hair of a black person. And this doll probably was somebody in a doll's house, but I think you can see the short black hair. It's wonderful. Now that's the woman, and this is her child. And this is the outfit of a little boy or a little girl in mid-19th century. And if you're wondering about all these nasty tags, I plead guilty, because this is my way of identifying my dolls. Now, for those of you who are brave enough to watch me discussing dolls associated with charitable functions, this is a doll that is dressed according to a description given by a little girl who is records herself actually going to a drawer in her house and picking out a doll that she could dress to give to the upcoming sanitary fair, and the doll was to be given in commemoration of her brother who was serving in the Union forces. And she's come down with another little outfit. Capes seem to be important components. This one even has soutache braid on her little cape, and then her little dress, which is very much the same pattern as that, the little rectangular skirted dress. Now, two more of mine, and then I'm going to turn this over to Chris to talk about her dolls. My other one here is dressed as a chimney sweep, and there must have been a pattern, commercial pattern, distributed in women's magazines for dressing frozen Charlies as chimney sweeps. And you find this chimney sweep outfit with his ladder and his brush in all sizes. The outfit is crocheted, but the rarer dressing on this frozen Charlotte, which is identifiable because of her knees, of all things, as a William Goebel doll. But this dress is composed entirely of seed beads that have been wired together to form her dress. It's about 1890s, 1900.
Do you think that's commercial? Do you think that was
No,
made
this
at
is
home?
Loving Hands at home.
Okay.
And this may well have been dressed for a church fair or something like that. Now, Chris, I'm going to move away and let you get in here.
Well, I am not as knowledgeable. However, I actually adore these little dolls. I think they are so charming. And as you can see, as you get later on, for instance here, this could be, even though it's jointed, is a little girl. She has her wardrobe. But why I brought her is that she has her own little frozen Charlotte doll. And then, as you can see, they began to dress them and also have different hairdos. Now, this one here is probably was a baby gift. It looks like something you'd give to, you know, when there was a baby. But she's in her little bunting, and she also has her own little baby. This does have side-parted hair, so that could have represented a boy. Now, the blue doesn't necessarily mean that, because at that time, the colors were not necessarily, blue for boy and pink, pink for girls. But I have seen them in bunting or in, pillows. They're very, you see them in a lot of different, I think they're very fun to put into pillows and tuck them into little things. Now this pair here, this is a husband and wife, and you can tell she's got a dress of a woman and he's got his suit, and her hairdo is quite a bit older than a lot of the hairdos that we are looking at on the table. But he has gold shoes on, but they came as a couple. And I think you see more of that. No, those outfits were made for those dolls. This little guy, also a guy but I think somebody just chopped down a piece of a sleeve and probably just put it on him. And that was his outfit. And you do see this a lot with the little frozen Charlottes. I think they were played with by children, and they have, I don't have it with me, but one with a wardrobe, and the wardrobe is very crude. Clearly it was, the wardrobes were made by their little owners. And even though small garments are difficult to make well, small garments for little fingers are great, because it doesn't take much material and it doesn't take much skill. So I'll put him down. And this one here is a mother, once again, a little later hairdo, mother and a child. This is like the face only a mother could love. I mean, becoming much cruder in this smaller size. But she has her little dress, and she has her little baby. They're wonderfully charming. They're very folk art. They're very sweet.
Those are the size dolls that populated dolls' houses.
This size even?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I thought she might have been a little short, but you know more than I do.
A lot of these ended up in dolls' houses.
Which makes sense, because they're tiny and they're,
And she could be a nursemaid to the child rather than the parent.
Well, that explains the different color hair. So then I think what we're going to do, okay, first of all, you have to talk about that. It's such a fabulous doll. His little outfit.
It's just a little boy in his outfit from the 1860s.
It's so charming.
And with his side part. The girls are usually identifiable by having the center part, and the ones with the greater amount of hair are the older children. And as we move to this next table, we come to the real bathing babies with the just beginning growth of hair. And we've been looking at some of the earlier dolls, and now we're passing over into the period of the late 1880s and in the 1890s, when these big brutes of dolls come into play, literally. These are weapons. They could be used for murder. The child was so inclined, and they would have survived and cleaned up. They might not have been easy to identify as the...
Well, and they're like these little bitty ones on steroids.
Yeah.
It's amazing how large that is, and we were talking about it. She said there's no way they would put that in.
And if you're lucky enough, you will occasionally find manufacturers who've marked their either the backside or the underside of the foot. Goebel, we have catalog pages where we can see the knees are the same as the knees on that doll, and the hands, the very expressive hands, so that we know that when we see that combination, those are Goebel dolls. But sometimes it's easy to begin to put these dolls in categories, sometimes it's not always so easy to follow the trail of hand positioning and foot positioning, leg positioning. Now, you may be saying, what's happened? The ones that we've been looking at have basically all been very, very white. The dolls could be either all white except for their features and their hair. They could be later on all pink tinted, or they could have just the head tinted pink and then go into a very, very white body. But the marks can either be a stamping in color or an impression on the foot.
About how many of these that you've seen are actually marked? I mean, 10%,
Well,
5%?
do you want me to be bloody honest?
Of course.
These are not what I have spent any time studying at all.
And yet here you are with this whole collection.
These are things that I've looked at over the years, and I've begun to put into some sort of chronology, but there is so much out there to be studied and really studied hard.
So is it like you get one or two or three and then it's like, wait a minute, I need to know about these guys? Or is it years and then you...
I'm sorry, I have to admit it. These are not the type of dolls that make my heart go pitter-pat. I have to have thousands of them.
Well, that just sinks my little pittery-pattery heart.
But I'm curious enough to want to know a little bit more about them. And if I had another maybe 600 years to study dolls, maybe I would come to some good conclusions. But
So then we're going to go from very large over to some very tiny examples. So,
well, on the images that we've been looking at, I'm just going to move this up slowly. Before, we've seen dolls in very basic attire, but we have a lady here in a ball gown, and she really has complicated dressings. Most of the dolls of this sort have very elementary, rudimentary bits of apparel, but she has quite a showy piece of confection to wear. And then you can see another little couple of bonneted babes and small circus characters from the mid-19th century, tiny black, and a little one in her chemise, the white chemise down to her knees. And this is the other thing, that if you're a collector, you can look for all sorts of variations of these dolls. There are endless variants that you really have to hunt out. They aren't always obvious at the very beginning. Now, we thought, since this wonderful figurine was available to us of the woman washing her feet in a tub, we would take the liberty of giving her a child. And I'm going to put the fingers on the child, because this is, I believe, a Altbeck and Gottschalk head, and therefore an Altbeck Gottschalk frozen Charlotte, because of her hairdo. We can tell what she is by her hairdo. She seems to have one foot that's a little bit shorter than the other, but these little dolls, because they were so dirt cheap, were not always cared for in the painting process and in the casting process with the greatest of care. And now I'm going to see if I can try and drop her in here. And cling dolls will frequently have molded shoes and socks, which are like the footwear on cling legs, and they can also help you identify a cling product. And here's another guy, I assume, I don't know, girl, baby, as opposed to an older child.
Almost all the big ones look like boys to me.
And that's where I think Frozen Charlie comes in. Now, most people think that Frozen dolls, BadeKinder, die out at the end of the 19th century. But they went on and on and on. And they went on very much the same manner that they had started out in. But before we leave the 19th century, we have this wonderful girl who's all in dress of the period. And she's like the little black girl that we saw with the fabric dress on, with her apron, pinafore, and her little dress, her ribbed hose, her pantalette cuffs, and these wonderful orange boots.
It's a lot of detail.
With her Alice-style hairdo, Alice in quotation marks. But she is mid-19th century. And because her arms are rigid, that makes no difference. The fact that she's dressed, she still was a four-letter word, a doll. Now, the rest of these on the table are 20th century, and they can be wonderful dolls like this little black boy who's same characteristics as the glazed china ones of the 19th century with his molded attire on, but he's 20th century, and as you can see again, he's got wonderful hair that replicates hair of a black person. And I have no idea which company might have made these. Then I have two that again meet the qualifications for being able to be dunked in water. This is the important thing. And this is Lord Plushbottom from, I forget which one of the cartoon series. And we have little Annie Rooney. And even though she's wearing a felt beret and she has yarn hair, she still would have qualified as being a bathing doll. And then because I was fortunate, my family and I were fortunate enough to know family members of George Borgfeldt and Company, this is a doll that was in the George Borgfeldt family. Doll buyer, Fred Cobb. And this one has a head that pivots. And I don't know whether this was something that they were looking at to put into production, or whether this was in production, I have no idea.
She's really cute.
But she's late teens, early 20s.
I think she wants to lay down and take a little nap, perhaps.
No, she's good there.
Okay.
Okay. Then we have this wonderful little boy in his swimsuit, and which indicates that he has an affinity for water 24/7, which is nice. And then we have another one that's looks like it's also in a bathing suit attire. And then I brought along two very late examples from the 1920s, 30s, with her bobbed hair, bangs, and these are often characterized by having gold shoes or silver shoes, and they're, again, just about as cheap as you can see. But what's so interesting about this little... She's still in her...
She's still resilient.
She's still in her wrapping paper for shipping. And this is the way she would have come in the box with hundreds of others like her in this modesty tissue paper wrapping.
So why don't we talk about...
I have two more.
Oh, sorry.
I have two more, my final two. Now, doll artists have also taken to producing all bisque dolls in the late 20th century. And this is Honey Bear, I think it is. And this was done by a specialist in miniatures, a very talented woman by the name of Eunice Tuttle. Just as cute as he can be. And my favorite might be a self-portrait, but I never had blonde hair. This is Nita Gerhardt, and she specialized in doing children who led active lives and had indications of having active lives and being out to protect themselves as well as establish their role in the hierarchy of the dolldom, let's say. So this is a little tomboy. And these are all nicely signed and dated.
So Anne, you've showed us all different varieties of dolls here, amazing different varieties, and I'm sure people are going to be looking for these dolls now. But I think the question on most people's minds is, since we've been saying that they're bathing dolls, do they float?
This boat, in the form of a doll, floats. And we just have a volunteer here.
I didn't see his hand go up.
Well, his hand is on the way up, excuse me. It's just that he has a little elbow, shoulder problem.
Let's see.
So we turn him over and we say, take a deep breath, and in you go.
There he goes. He's floating.
Now, isn't that fun for a child? Wouldn't a child in your family be mesmerized by that?
Well, I would be. My daughter actually would like. Can we turn him over and see if he floats on the other way?
He may not, because he's got a vent in his back side.
Oh, so he wants to.
Yeah.
He wants to do the breaststroke.
I'm going to take this out.
I am here.
And then the other thing is...
Hey, we have a scale, so what is that about?
We have 2 points to make with the scale.
Okay.
And we're going to bring down the biggest bruiser of all so that you can see how tall these dolls got to be. This may not be the tallest example. There may be others even taller than this.
Have you ever seen one bigger than this?
I don't recall having seen, but again, I have not made a scientific study of these.
And yet you know more than most of us put together, so there you go.
But these really, when they get to be this size, are serious weapons. And we're talking about if you whack somebody with this brute.
Look at that. He weighs almost 6 pounds. That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That is a big doll.
And dolls made the same day may have had more slip poured into the mold, and they could have weighed even more than 6 pounds, depending on how much slip went in. Now, I've brought one of his siblings along just to give you an idea of the various.
Oh, sorry.
Put him back in his scales. Ah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, folks. Here is the smallest one that I've seen of less than an inch. And I think that gives you some concept of A to Z of these dolls in terms of their proportions.
That's amazing. I mean, how little would that mold
This is
be?
less than an inch.
That's crazy.
Most of them that survive are just at the inch mark. Now, remember, Germans don't use inch for measuring; they use centimeters.
Yeah.
But this, I measured inch because I thought that was easier for people to understand than centimeters. So.
Well, we're getting to the end of the program. Are you getting hungry?
Yes, and I thought you were never going to ask.
I believe there's a beautiful scone right here, just with your name on it.
Ooh, yummy. I love scones. I really love scones. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm very into something. What did I find? I found a frozen Charlotte. And this is what so many of them gave their lives for, to be baked into cakes and puddings.
And king cakes, right? In
king cakes, yes. Yeah.
In New Orleans during the, but yeah, that's why you see so
many of the little ones.
Teeny ones, yeah.
No. And you have to have your dental insurance up to date. But well, thank you for offering me a body in a biscuit.
So I think we only have one more who is I think the baddest of the bad.
We have to wait a second while he gets his act together because
you're drowning him.
But I want to make it good because this little boy is very, very bad. And this is what dolls are all about. Having fun and making people laugh. Just like we laugh at the we of the doll. So everybody have a good afternoon, good evening, or whatever time of day it is, and enjoy.
Oh God, here it comes again. And you're a delight, but I'm leaving.
Goodbye, world. It's time for me to go. Bye.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.